Hello.
Good evening. Welcome to Trust Talks by the Purim Trust. How are you doing, Roy?
Wow, I'm excited. This is good,
Yeah,
isn't it, Esther?
we had a little jingle, Roy.
It feels all professional.
I know. Oh, it's really good. So welcome if you're joining us on YouTube or on Facebook Live. I can see there's some of you there already. Hey, Beverly, thanks for giving us a wave. We
Hey,
really
Bev.
appreciate that. Because we're live on both channels, we can't always see who exactly is joining us unless you give us a wave or write a comment. So please give us a wave now if you're there, so we can give you a shout out or say hello, and we'll know that you're there for moral support. So thank you for joining us. We had a little kind of taster session, didn't we, Roy, a couple of weeks ago? We were talking about have we found the secret to a happier, healthier, holistic life. But now we're kicking off and diving straight into the deep end with a series of talks, and this is called "How to Turn a Toxic Past into a Purposeful Now." We're going to be talking about this, Roy, aren't we, over the next few weeks?
Yep.
And tonight we're going to be talking about trauma, a big subject. Um, but thank you for your comments. Hello from the Philippines.
Wow.
Hi, Roland. Good to hear from you. Hello, Anna. Thank you for giving us a wave. And Syrian, good to have you all with us.
Hey, this
Keep
is
your comments.
amazing.
Yeah, keep your comments coming.
People from all over the world.
Amen. It's
Where's
really good.
Bev now?
Bev is, I'm sure she'll tell you in a minute, but she's in South Africa.
Wow,
It's
amazing.
getting late in the
Fantastic.
evening there. But and Lee, hi Lee. Thanks for
Hi,
commenting.
Lee.
Lee is our administrator at the Purim Trust. She does so much work to help keep our projects going. So good to see you there. Um, yeah, and Bev is in South Africa.
Big up South
Awesome.
Africa.
So let me just explain a little bit about Trust Talks, because we're actually part of the Purim Trust charity. That this idea of having some conversations like this live has come out really of how we've had lots of conversations over the years, Roy, haven't we, about some difficult subjects, difficult experiences in our lives, particularly in mine. And these conversations, raw, vulnerable conversations, have actually been life changing for me. They've set me on a different path in life. They've helped bring hope in my heart, and that hope has led to freedom and purpose. And so, our hope really with these talks is that for any of you who are struggling with anything, that something of what we share as we go through some of these things might help build hope in your heart as well. So,
Yeah.
um, so looking at this subject of trauma tonight, and how to turn a toxic past into a purposeful now, there are things that happen in life, and often it's the not so good things that set us on a path, um, real toxic things that can really affect the rest of our lives. And we've experienced that. So we're going to share some of our stories this evening, and as we progress in the weeks. But that's not an easy thing to do. There's
No,
something about being vulnerable and sharing about experiences that you've been through. Or that's not easy, is it, Roy? It's not
no,
really
not at
something.
all.
Yeah,
Really, we don't want to share our stories. That's the truth, isn't it? Um, because in a way, the way we have survived trauma is by hiding and creating a story. You know, my old teacher, Arthur Burt, used to say, there's a person you think you are, there's a person you want other people to think you are, and there's the person you really are. And to survive trauma and not feel that pain, you create another story to secure yourself. So in a way, you spend your life hiding. And another reason you hide is because of shame. You know, or often somewhere in your trauma, there's some kind of blame and shame attached to it as well, often. And when you live with that feeling of shame and blame, and not identifying with what's happened and blocking that trauma, you're used to not sharing it, and that's your method of survival. So to come out here now and to start to be honest and open and talk about stuff, that's not easy, and it's not something that we'd really want to do.
No, not at all. It takes something to share some of this stuff and to be vulnerable, but we're gonna we're gonna give it a go, aren't we, Roy?
Yeah.
First of all, I wondered if I could just start actually with if we define what trauma is. I'm sure most people know what it is, but I was thinking if we just expand a little bit on what trauma means, what it is.
Yeah.
I was looking at the definition of it.
Yeah.
The dictionary describes it as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. It can be a physical injury, but what we know, Roy, is that trauma can be physical, mental, emotional, and what some would define as trauma, some others wouldn't. It's a completely personal thing. But why, Roy? I know you were saying that we want to hide, and I think the reason we want to hide these things and these stories is because it brings us security, like you said, but also it makes other people feel more comfortable. But why do you think it's important that, to share stories, to share our stories?
It's a very good question. I think in some ways, I've often worked with people one-to-one, and I never try and get them to tell me details of their life. I don't think that's necessary. Personally, I mean, I'm no expert, because I think people relive the trauma in a way. If you go into too much detail, not everyone can tell the story. So often when I'm dealing with people, I talk about the effects of trauma. How has it affected you, and to deal with its effects. But why do I think it's important that we do this? I think one of my most influenced people on this planet, if that's proper English, probably not, is a man called Arthur Burt, a great spiritual teacher. This guy, he used to minister with Smith Wigglesworth, and he was in all the revivals, and he was on the mission field. We buried him at 103 a few years ago. But he was the first minister or leader or spiritual teacher that I came across who was transparent, and he helped me get free, because we have these images of people. There's you, Esther, you got a successful ministry, you're helping hundreds of kids, your face is all over the place, doing a great job, but no one knows what you've been through and what you've had to go through to get to where you are. So people can look at us and think, oh, they've got it all together, but we haven't. And we're in this process. And if we don't learn to be honest with people and tell people the truth about our lives, about our struggles, then they stay stuck. Because Arthur told the truth about his failure. He was one of the greatest men I knew on the planet, but yet he told his weakest points in his life. And that encouraged us. To get free. So the scripture says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. So by saying what's true, that's the first stage of becoming free. Now, you're not free until you come to the place of truth, which is Christ himself. But to say what's true means you're owning what's happened, you're owning what it's done to you, you're owning the effects of it, so that you can now disown it and come into who you truly are. Because what's happened to you doesn't define you. Your trauma doesn't define you. What defines you eventually is the truth, and that's who you really are. But the journey is you have to first come to a place of what is true. Does that make sense, Esther, what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. And often that sounds like a really easy step, but it's hard, isn't it? Because because we usually identify with what's happened to us, and
Yeah.
we own it in a bad way. And if I hide it from myself or somebody else, it means I don't have to acknowledge that thing that's happened to me is who I am. But actually, what we're going to explore is the thing that's happened to you isn't you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the opposite of how you feel when you've been through something traumatic. And I
Yeah.
wondered, Roy, if you felt like it, if you could share with us some of what's happened in your life that you feel was a trauma or traumatic.
Yeah. Some of my earliest memories as a child, from like the earliest memories. My dad was from Jamaica. My mum was from Ireland. They came over after the war, and there were 7 of us kids, and I was number 6. And my earliest memories is seeing my mum pouring with blood after my dad had beaten her up, and the door kicked off, our front door kicked off the hinges. That was some of my earliest memories, was us barricading ourselves in a room, my dad coming home drunk and watching the door being kicked in and looking at the horror on my mum's face, knowing that she's going to take a beating once he gets in. And meantime, one of the older brothers would jump out the window, or sisters, and go to the telephone box. We didn't have a telephone, to get the police to try and restrain him in some way. They never used to arrest you in those days for domestic violence. There wasn't much they could do about it. It's not like now. So they were some of my early traumatic memories. You know, I grew up on a estate where you were introduced to crime at a very young age. And some of my earliest memories was our house being raided by police. And I would be looking, we lived on the ground floor in a council estate, and I would be looking at a face of a police officer outside my window. Our house would be surrounded. They would come in, they would turn the place upside down. My dad, in his Jamaican language, would be cursing them and cussing them, and they would carry one of my brothers out, you know, handcuffed. Going to prisons to visit my brother, going into ball stores as a child. Our house was a place where I never felt peace. I always felt as like, I need to get away, because there was always contention, always argument. I never heard my dad, as much as I love my dad to bits, don't get me wrong, but he never said a kind word to my mum. He only cursed her. And that really took its toll on her. I remember when I was 10, we came back from Ireland. We'd been there for quite a few weeks, maybe about 8 or so, 6 or 8 weeks. When I came home, I'd left my dad normal. When I came home, this was very traumatic for me. He had had a mental breakdown. He was walking around the estate and at the place. He was like a skeleton. Before he always wore suits. He looked smart. Now he was in rags. He'd been stabbed, and the stab was now infected. He was totally off his head, and the only person he would trust is me and my little sister. We were 10 and 8. I think that was our ages. And I remember the only ones he would go with was us, because he was so scared. So we went with him in the ambulance. It was very traumatic. And when we got out the ambulance, all the police ascended on him. And I remember me and my sister were screaming, because I thought his wound is down in the dirt, and they handcuffed him and carried him off. And we were just little kids. And I remember seeing it was something like out of a movie, because I saw the nurse come in with her needle, and he was cursing in his Jamaican language. I won't repeat any of it. And suddenly you'd heard the silence where they'd given him the injection. And then as a kid, I would go and visit him, and I was always scared of anyone with a disability. I don't know why, but that was a fear I had. And I would go there, and all these mental patients, you know, and there would be people saying, I remember this one lady was saying to me, "Can you hear my dead husband?" he's talking to me. And you know, and you know, the stories would be too long, but they were some of my earliest memories, just some of many of my earliest memories of trauma. Another one that I suppose this type of trauma here, what happened, I don't think I've recovered from it, Esther. I think this is something that broke me and I never recovered. But let me just say something I forgot to say. When I remember when my dad had this mental breakdown and everything, and me and my brothers, we were sitting in the car watching him because we were trying to get help for him at the time. And I could only but cry. And I remember they said, stop it, stop crying. And I was so broken to see my dad in that state. It was so traumatic, but I was not allowed. You know, when you grow up in a tough environment, tears is not permitted. Emotion, you have to suck it up. And as a 10-year-old, I had to suck that up, you know. And I remember when my sister, I was 15 and she was 13, and she'd committed suicide. She had taken my dad's tablets, which obviously were for mental health. And then she tried to take a train to get to my brother's. I suppose she was trying to get help, but she died in Clapham Junction. Her body, well, she didn't die. She was found in Clapham Junction, and then she was in a coma for a week, and then she died. And I remember when she died, I felt so much pain, Esther, that it was physical. I felt physical pain in my body. I remember what I used to do is just get my Bible and rest it on there to try and relieve the pain. And in a funny way it did. I don't know why. I can't explain it, but it seemed to. But in those times, Esther, my mind was not with it. You know, trying to learn at school, those kind of things, very difficult. Just trying to be functional as a child. And so it was too much. I remember the self-hate I had, because I thought if I was a good brother, she wouldn't have done that. She would have been, but you know, our context didn't permit us. We were not like, how are you doing? Do you want to talk about stuff? We just didn't exist. How do you feel? Didn't exist. Yeah. You know, so when she did that, I felt, which was an unjust feeling really to feel against myself. But from that day, I said, you are a murderer because you were not there. And I treated myself as a murderer from that day on. Wow. And to be honest with you, Esther, some of those things I can't, there's a lot of memories, my early memories with my sister, I don't remember anymore. It's just gone. I can't, I tried to, it's just gone. I only remember I'm a murderer. Wow. So, and the pain was so bad with all these different things and others. Eventually, and especially my brother going to prison and there's so many, that I learned not to feel anymore. I disconnected myself from feeling, and that's one of the effects of trauma. Yeah. I just tell you this other one quick, not to rabbit on, but another thing that traumatized me was religious trauma, and it wasn't anyone's fault. But I belonged to a group of Christians, and I still belong to them. You know, we still meet, and we're still family. But really, our doctrine was traumatic. And as a child, what they told me, they said, listen, you have to be perfect. You have to obey all God's word. If you don't, you will go to hell. What does that mean? It means you'll burn in fire for all eternity. Wow. That scared me. Yeah. And so my whole life was to develop to be perfect, which is impossible. You know, but I really tried. And so these are the sort of traumas that I would highlight, Esther, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's a huge amount of trauma. I think to experience all of that at an incredibly young age. there's something that you mentioned, Roy, that you don't have memories of your sister before she passed. All you remember is that you're a murderer, as you said in your words. Why do you think that is, that you don't remember? Do you know why?
Because I remember one of the effects of trauma is to disengage. And I remember when people used to say, "Oh, we really miss your sister," or "Wasn't it tragic?" or what, they just try and be nice. And I'd want to rip their heads off, I'll be honest with you, I just couldn't bear them talking about my sister because it was too painful for me. So I had to disengage. So I think by not feeling pain, I also forgot everything. It was a survival. I think all of what I did at my early ages was a method to survive as a child. I don't think I couldn't cope with the amount of pain and trauma that that little kid was experiencing. So I had to disengage. And so I think that might be why. I'm not an expert on trauma. I don't understand it fully, but I just know the effects of it.
Yeah, maybe we should put that disclaimer out there that we aren't any experts. We're not qualified as such in psychology or anything like that. All we know is that we have experienced these things in our life, and we're seeing the other side of it. But I can relate totally to that you were explaining about how we block out a lot of traumatic experiences, and in the effects of the trauma, we, especially as young children or young people, develop ways to handle these things. The only way, I think, children do it in different ways, I'm sure, but with the experiences I had in my youth and my childhood, I was the same, just blocking things out. We're going to talk about a bit more about that in other weeks, aren't we? But I can relate to some of the things that you're sharing. And what else, Roy, other than that? What other effects do you think there have been in your life because of trauma?
Well, I think one of the effects that spring immediately to mind. So in order for me to survive, I developed a perfectionist lifestyle, and I did that through religion. And the religion that I was in, they enforced that as well. So I would go to church, like it must have been 9 times a week, Esther, because I almost belonged to 2 churches. I remember going to Bible study on Monday, and then I'd go to another church's Bible study on a Tuesday, and then it was prayer meeting on Wednesday, and then we had young people's meeting Thursday, and then there was another church that had young people's meeting Friday, and then on Saturday, most Saturdays we would have fasting. And even some Fridays we'd have all-night prayer meeting. I mean, these are serious Pentecostals, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with our roots, but and then there'd be fasting on Saturday, and then normally on a Saturday we would visit another church that would have a meeting, and then twice on Sunday. That's probably more than 9, isn't it? So that wasn't unusual for me to always be in church, come home from school, get ready, go to church. And in those days, we would fast as teenagers, so there might be some people on here that were there in those days, some of my friends, and we would fast for 3 days and 3 nights, Esther, no food, no water, teenagers. Wow. We were serious. So our whole life was the Bible, was God, was sharing the gospel, was church, so it was trying to be perfect. But all the time I was struggling with sin, really. There was this trauma in my life of trying to be perfect. But the other side was I really longed to be loved by a woman, and in our church you really couldn't even have a girlfriend. It was so strict. You couldn't think about it until you was ready to get married. And And I think if you think about my mum's background, she had been in 3 relationships, had children with 3 different guys, and all of them were abusive, like
Oh.
some of them really seriously abusive.
Mm.
So you can imagine her levels of trauma as well.
Mm.
As a child, and now listen, don't get me wrong, I love my mom and dad. They're both, not here now. They died when I was in my 20s. But both of them, I love to bits, but both had suffered with trauma. And if you can imagine, it must have been hard for my mum to show affection and that kind of thing to me. I knew she loved me, but I don't remember her hugging me and kissing me, and but she did affirm me. She was amazing at affirming me and telling me, one day you're going to preach the word, Roy, and you're going to be a great preacher. She was my greatest encourager. But just those early years of nurture,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there was always a longing in me for love from a woman, and I didn't get it, and sometimes I was subjected to abuse by other women on the estate, and that when in my teens, and they were in their 30s, and it shouldn't have happened. And so that created within me this this struggle with lust as a man that I've struggled with my whole life. The other kind of things that that happened to me, I remember, so when I stopped going to church, I'd got a job working at British Aerospace as an apprentice aircraft electrician. And because our denomination told us, if you're not from this denomination, you're not saved. It's not the truth.
Right.
And so where I went, there wasn't this particular denomination. So I didn't go to church. And then I landed up getting involved in the wrong crowd. And then before long, I was drinking, taking drugs. And eventually I had to leave my apprenticeship. Well, I'd finished it, and then I had to leave. And I landed back up in London, selling drugs, drinking every day, just lost. I mean, lost, and so ashamed to go to look my mum in the face. So I spent a lot of time not even in the house again. I just went in and slept. Sometimes I slept in my van outside. I hardly ate. I weighed about 11.5 stone back then. And 15, 16 is normal for me now. So so these were some of the effects: addictions, struggles with sin. Because like for some people, who maybe not Christian, it's not a big thing, lust and all the rest of it. It's like normal. But for a Christian, that you're trying to be perfect, it becomes a massive mountain. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your questions, Esther.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you've pulled out some key things actually that I want to touch on, because one is, you mentioned before, one of the effects of trauma is never feeling like you've experienced peace.
Yeah.
Like living in this state of, I guess it's fight or flight.
Yes.
And I guess it's possible for some people to be living with the effects of trauma and not necessarily know it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we suppress these experiences that have happened to us. We block them out. We don't go there because of shame or guilt. And I think that's true of me, to not realize really until much later in my life that I was living with the effects of trauma and not aware of it. And I think for some people watching you expressing it like that you never experienced any peace, like that's like whoa, I can totally relate to that. That is a prime indicator of having dealt with or having the effects of trauma. Another way that you described it as well. Sorry, Roy.
No, I remember that real clear. Being in continuous torment.
Yes.
Just as a child, just always in torment. And I used to pray, like, God, could you take it away? But he didn't, I had to live in that. And it took a lot of learning and development, spiritual development, to learn how to deal with that. And I think that's why also these programs are going to be important, Esther, to show how it goes from this kind of stuff to purpose. you know.
Yeah, definitely.
But Esther, is there anything you wanted to say about the 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 not living in living in a state of no peace?
Yeah, I think very similar to you, but also completely different. I experienced a lot of trauma as a child growing up. Um, as you know, Roy, I was sexually abused for many years growing up in my earliest years. They're my earliest memories.
Mm,
Um, and the same as you, suppressed a lot of that and blocked it out because it was just too painful and just too much. Um, but I can identify with that feeling of being tormented, of just living my life in agitation and
mm,
not necessarily knowing why. You expressed it as well about physical pain.
yeah.
Um, so the
Could you
experiences that,
feel that physical pain in your body, the stress of
mm,
that as well?
yeah, definitely looking it up. So I was sexually abused um, for probably the first 10 years of my life. And then it stopped. And then I went through an experience not long after it ended. I was then out with my brother as a 10-year-old. We went out to feed the ducks. Actually, I was 9 then, 9 or 10, and I was molested when I was feeding the ducks. And this man tried to drag me to his car to abduct me and managed to get away. So these experiences, I feel, really molded who I was.
Mm,
That I was racked with fear. My whole life was on this mission of, I think, when you're abused as a child and you're groomed, you are made to believe that these bad things are happening to you because, well, this is how it was for me. It was
yeah,
because I was evil,
yeah.
because I was terrible, and I needed to be punished and I needed to be molded into a better person. And if I could just be a better person,
Mm,
I wouldn't experience this pain and trauma. And I lived my life like that, striving
yeah.
to be
So
a
it's very
non.
similar in the way of this perfectionist thing, that you're
Absolutely.
trying to be perfect.
Yeah. And I buried all of that. I pursued this role of I need to be not to be evil anymore. I need to be a better person of driving myself. That I reached burnout in my teenage years
Wow.
and became severely ill. And we'll come on to that another time. But that was an effect of trauma in my life.
Mm,
My whole body shut down because I couldn't contain this trauma that I'd experienced. And there were other things in my life, but interestingly, I kept all of that to myself until I was almost 30. You know, I
wow.
blocked it out. I believed I was from the devil, and I needed to be punished. And it's taken a lot of years to unravel that. Um, but there is
That must have
hope.
been a big shock as well to your family when you finally,
Yes.
because your
There,
mom and dad didn't know, and
yeah. To say it was like a bomb going off is an understatement. You know, there's a major fallout from then expressing any of that. Um, and it's really by the grace of God that our family is pulled together because it was my half brother actually who was the abuser in our
mm,
family. But you know, there have been other experiences in my life. My mum got cancer um, when I was in my 30s and had a long time of suffering with that. And I was sort of myself and my dad were her major caregivers, if you like. And just even going through grief and watching someone die and nursing them through death and um, you know, making the decisions as to somebody's care and actually being the ones to wash them and decide not to put them in a hospice and be there through all of that.
yeah,
Even if you don't go through that caregiving experience, grief in itself can be a major time of trauma.
definitely.
For some others, it's not, and for some, it is. And you know, this feeling of agitation and the effect that it has on you physically, mentally, and emotionally. And you describing the loss of your sister, that physical pain,
Mm,
that you felt. I can remember feeling that so agonizingly in my body, in my chest.
Yeah.
And I had guilt that went with that, which wouldn't make
Yeah.
any rational sense, and not in the way that you did of, oh, if only I'd done this,
Yeah.
and not made that decision to take all of her bandages off, and her skin wouldn't have split open. And I don't mean to be really graphic, but
Yeah.
death is not pretty in any form, and the torment that goes with it. If only I'd done this or I'd not done that. If only I'd said this and not said that. And then that feeling like you expressed of, wanting to rip someone's head off because they then say, oh, well, for me, it was, you need to rejoice because, your mum's in
Yeah.
heaven. And,
Yeah.
it all well-meaning stuff. But to the way that we talk to someone in grief as well
Yeah.
is a delicate thing.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
also, Roy, you mentioned about this need to be loved.
Mm.
And I wonder if that's what comes out of shame in
Yeah.
particular, because I can relate to that as well. This
Can I
feeling of,
ask you something quick, Esther, just before we go there?
yeah,
But I'm aware that this ain't easy for you to say the things you're saying right now.
yeah,
Could you just say something about that, Esther? So just because I want people to understand the cost here for you to do this and the heart behind it.
yeah, I think for anybody, we're not talking about pretty things, are we, Roy? We're talking about the hardest experiences of our life and everything that goes with that, the labels that we've
Mm.
attached to ourselves with that, of shame. These are not the subjects that people really often want to talk about. And um, that's why I felt actually we should have them, because these are the conversations that have changed my life. Me kind of bearing my soul at times with you when nobody else really wanted to hear it, or other people would say, well, maybe just repeat this phrase or this scripture over and over and over, or,
Mm.
don't be so hard on yourself, or it's actually these conversations with you that have helped me get free of realizing these things that happen to me are not me. They're just things that happen to me, and that's not the
Yeah.
real me. And I
Yeah.
just felt like there will be other people at home who have been through traumatic experiences, a traumatic experience, who were feeling how I felt, which was totally without hope. I'd lost all hope that I could ever feel differently about myself. I lost all hope that I could ever have a healthy relationship with a partner or a husband. I'd lost all hope that I was good or that anything good could happen to me. I was covered in shame.
Mm.
I was broken, lost, um, really at my last straw, or maybe I've lost my last straw. And
Mm.
there might just be one person who's feeling that same way, like there is no hope. This is who I am, and I'm never going to be better. I'm never going to be good. All kinds of things we could add in there. I'm never going to have a life worth living,
Yeah.
and I'm never going to be good for anything. That's how I felt. I'm not
Yeah.
good for anything. And my heart behind this is not that I want to share all these difficulties I've had, and neither do you. But if it
No.
helps one person to hope, if it helps one person to think there is a way forward, that my life can be different, um, then this is what Trust Talks is about. Um, so it might sound like we're talking about really depressing things, but it's with the purpose of hope. Like you said
Yeah.
in the beginning, sometimes we
Yeah.
have to look at these things in order to be free from them.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Esther. That's really helpful. So say what you was going to say if we've still got time. You was
Yes,
making a point.
yeah. Just the last point you were saying about how you really felt like you needed the love of a woman. You needed to
Mm.
feel loved, and I was thinking about that. I identify with that as well, and I think that's one of the effects of shame in particular, or it has been in my life.
Yeah.
That I want to feel lovable. I want to feel worthy to be loved, and equally not believing that I was worth loving. But do you think
Yeah.
that's what comes out of shame as well? Is it shame?
Yeah. I've never thought about it. It's a really good, but I always know that shame has attached itself to me my whole life. I've never been able to be free of that feeling of I am lost, I am unworthy, I will never be worthy, I cannot be, God cannot love me.
Mm,
I'm too sinful, I'm not
mm,
good enough. And yeah, I can see what you're saying, because is even if just one person loves you, it kind of gives you hope. Do you know what I mean? It's like you're not, it's just one person encouraging, say like, you're not that, you're more than that, you are lovable, God does love you. Oh man. And some really powerful people in my life that they haven't said a whole lot, but they would just say little things like, Roy, you know they might say you're too hard on yourself, or they just might say you are loved by God. Like they would say something that would make me feel like I didn't believe it, because this thing's written on your heart, isn't it, Esther? It doesn't matter
mm,
what people say. It's a whole process to get this stuff out of you.
yeah,
And I'm not so sure I'm completely free. I think I'm still a work in progress, but
yeah,
I'm definitely not where I was. I know that. But yeah, I think that it makes sense what you're saying.
yeah,
Because it just gives you a little like, please, someone love me a bit.
yeah.
Give me
But it's
something.
the irony of that in my life is I was like, I wish someone would just love me for me, that I was good enough to be loved. And yet then when I was loved, I would totally reject it because I
Yeah.
couldn't believe it. And if that's you and you're feeling the same, there is hope. You
Yeah.
want love, you want relationship, and then you just totally self-destruct. There's hope. There's hope in that.
Can I
And
say
so,
something quick on that, Esther, real
yeah,
quick?
yeah,
Because what you do, you see, when somebody, you want the love, but when someone gives it, you don't believe it. So you hit them hard, like, and what you're doing is you're testing their love, and they don't know that. They just think you're rejecting them. But you're saying this is too valuable to me. Don't say that. Don't say you love me if you don't mean it. So
mm,
you really give them a hard time, and so they've got to be really persevering, haven't they?
yeah. I'm just thinking about my husband right now. Bless him. Oh, yes.
My poor wife.
No comment.
Bless them.
But yeah, I think yeah, totally feel what you're saying, Roy. And we're going to touch on these subjects more in the coming weeks. We're going to be looking at shame and guilt, blocking, addictions, grief, like we mentioned. So you'll see the little message come up there to hit subscribe. If you want to catch the other episodes on the coming weeks on Thursdays, then hit subscribe if you're on YouTube to make sure you don't miss any more of those. But again, just to reiterate, the purpose of that is just to encourage you that there is a way to be free from these things, so that hope can be built in your heart, that there
Yeah.
can be a life of freedom and a life of purpose. And we're going to keep focusing on that in the coming weeks. Um, but I wonder if, looking at the time, if we just open it up for any comments or questions. We love all the comments that you've been making. Let me just share some of these with you. So Bev, my dear friend Bev has put, so it's so important to have these conversations. Brené Brown says something really amazing, that shame cannot survive being spoken and met with empathy. That is so good. Sharing and then being really heard breaks that shame. Isn't
Wow.
that good? Yeah,
That's
that comment
fantastic.
that's
Thank
coming
you,
up
Ben.
there.
Beautiful.
What else have we got? So we've had Abigail has put, Esther, your name means star, so continue to shine as you impact lives, even mine. Thanks, Abby. Thank you
Wow.
for that, Abby. That's so encouraging. I'm just
Bless
seeing if
you.
I can scroll through any of the other comments. Um, Dan, hi Dan, has said this really relates. I'm so glad that I tuned in.
Hey,
Thank you,
Dan.
Dan. Good to hear from you.
Bless
Any
you.
if anyone else has got any comments or questions, please write them now in the comment section on YouTube or Facebook, because we'll get those. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this. It's good to see so many of you in different places. We've got Lee in Wales, Nicola in Warsaw. Hey, Nicola.
Hi, Nicola.
So yeah, so just some comments through. Thank you, Roy, for sharing what you've shared, because it's not easy. It's really
And
not.
likewise, Esther, thank you.
And we're sure that
And we'll keep sharing. And what we'll do is we'll walk through the process, won't we? We'll walk through bit by bit and see how do we get to the place. Because, both of us, we do a lot of ministry, Esther, don't we? We're helping a lot of people. And we had to go through a process to get there. And, I don't know if I can say this in a couple of seconds, but we are a called people, we're a chosen people, and we'll talk more about that. God has blessed us and allowed us, we've come through this, but so we can help someone. There's someone else who needs our help. One of the things that I've seen a lot is, even though I'd lost my sister to suicide, the amount of people that have said to me, I was going to commit suicide, but after I spoke to you, or something you did prevented that. And so our life isn't wasted, Esther, is what I'm trying to say. There's purpose.
yeah, absolutely. And in actual fact, that was my feeling, that you have done that in my life. At times when I've totally lost all hope, as I said, that if I can share with others this gift that you have to minister to people, to help them see hope, and to enter a different kind of freedom where there's healing in the heart from these traumatic experiences, then that's really the purpose as well of these, is to share that gift that God has given you to help others. So thank you, Lee, for your comment, saying thank you both for opening up conversations about these difficult topics. And Raj has put, hi guys, thanks for sharing. So glad I tuned in. God bless you both.
Hey, Princess.
Yeah. But keep your comments coming in. Next week, Roy, we're going to be looking at shame and guilt.
Right.
Another biggie. Abby's put, this is Lorna. Thank you both for your transparency and honesty. As a body of Christ, this is what we need, a safety net to turn to without judgment. But for sure, support is there. May God's best be yours. Lorna. Thank you, Lorna.
Yeah, thank you, Sister Lorna.
Yeah,
and Abby's her daughter, precious daughter.
Ah, great.
So
That's
precious.
good to know. Somebody has put here, is it Ali? Have I pronounced your name right? Hi, I'm in recovery and still can have doubts in my faith, which I'm really not happy saying. My husband died through mainly prescribed medication, and I'm having a strong feeling that God wants me to look into it more. Wow, thank you for that. Ali, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Thank you so much for sharing that, which is really not easy. So our heart just goes out to you as well, who is struggling with these things right now.
Yeah.
We hope that we can encourage you. And Lynn's put, thank you for sharing your truths. Thank you for your great message today. We're really glad you've enjoyed it.
Bless you, Lynn.
So we're going to be here every Thursday at 7:30. Isn't that right, Roy?
Yep.
And still covering this topic of how to turn a toxic past into a purposeful now. And we're going to head off. And shall I just read one last comment before we
Why
go?
not?
This is from Bev. Thank you, Bev. It's also so interesting you both mentioned about the impact of trauma in terms of the perfectionism and the blocking memories.
Mm.
I know I have similar things I've blocked, and as I've been processing things over the years, I've also started to appreciate that these things were to protect me. My body, my soul was trying to protect me, yes.
Yeah.
Instead of shaming these things, I've decided to honor myself for being so resilient and appreciate these traits, but let them know that I am safe now, and now they no longer serve me. Wow, that is good.
Hey, Bev, we need to come on your show.
Yes, Bev.
That's
Are you
so
free
profound.
on other Thursdays? So good.
That is
Couldn't
so
have said it.
profound.
Oh, that is. We need to put that on our Trust Talks page.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've probably gone over time anyway. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Roy, for your truths. And
Thank you, Esther.
we will see you next time. If you're on YouTube, hit subscribe, like I said before, to make sure that you catch us every Thursday at 7:30. And give us a thumbs up as well on YouTube, or a like on Facebook if you any of this has impacted you. And we will look forward to seeing you next Thursday at 7:30.
Thank you for watching Trust Talks by the Purim Trust. To find out more about the work that we do supporting vulnerable women and children, you can go to thepurimtrust.org and get involved with building hope in the lives of those who need it.